Hello and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful in the studio today to give you an update on a project that I'm working on. I haven't recorded anything on this particular journal in a while, and so I wanted to kind of bring in an update. I apologize for not recording this process to this point. I ended up getting sick over the holidays and my voice just has not been up to doing recordings. So I'll kind of walk you through what I did and my thought process and hopefully that will help. If you do have any questions about it or anything, please leave them down in the comments. For most of the things that I did in this journal, I have other videos, so I can always, if you're brand new and don't know how to do the stitching, that kind of thing, I will put links to videos down below so that you can at least see what this process is like in a different journal. So the one I'm working on now is for my sister's best friend, Melaine, and Melaine is also an artist. She had not known I was doing this channel. She lives in Mississippi at the moment, and she didn't know about my channel until the last visit she had with my sister, and she showed her the channel, and she started watching my videos and asked if I would make her a journal. So I'm assuming the kind that she had wanted were the type that I had been working on, which was creating journals out of old books with lots of little pockets and tucks and that kind of thing. So I asked her what kind of binding she would like me to do, and she asked if I would do a Coptic stitch binding. So for those of you who maybe don't know all the different bindings, I will put, some videos down below that maybe go through the process, since I didn't do this one on camera, but I'm going to try to explain as I go. So a Coptic stitch binding and why she wanted one is something similar to this. I don't have an actual one because it's not my favorite one to do. It's really a kettle stitch. The difference between a kettle stitch and a Coptic binding is that in a Coptic binding, you would actually punch your holes. You can't see these because I've covered them up with tape at this point, but I have stitching along 3 lines and then another 3 here and another 3 here. If this were a true Coptic binding, I would actually have holes that also lined up on the front of my cover and on the back of my cover. And you would actually stitch, as you're stitching your binding together, each of these folios, you're stitching the cover and the next one and the next one and then the back cover. So what happens is then you kind of have a loosey-goosey binding, and that's why it's not my favorite. It's really hard to get it tight enough that everything, is nice and snug without big gaps in between. You get these gaps anyway, just because of the way this is stitched together. And that's okay, but you see it lays nice and flat. So for art journals, it's a great type of binding. But again, I don't like the loosey-goosiness of it. So what I do is I do the kettle stitch and stitch the book block together, which is what you call this whole section with the pages minus the cover. And then I actually take that first part of the folio and glue it down. I would glue down these little tapes first to the cover and then glue that first page down, and that is what holds my cover onto my book. So that's my preferred way to do it, and because of how I wanted to kind of do a hybrid journal for her, I wanted to do a better cover, and I'll explain kind of as I go here. So originally I was looking for a vintage book about mermaids because she really likes that, and I just thought that would suit her. I didn't find one, but I found a book called The Hurricane. And so I thought, well, she lives on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, so that's kind of appropriate too. Now, I've gone ahead and taken the spine off. I didn't do that until I really knew how I was going to bind this and actually had all my signatures put together, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave this on or not, because, it says The Hurricane. So I think since I've taken it off, I'm going to turn this into a bookmark for her, and that way it is still part of the whole package. So I'll set that aside. So when I went to put this book together, I liked the cover. It has some distressing that's just natural to it, some fading, and that was all okay with me. Melaine is also an artist, and so I kind of want to leave it somewhat simple so that she can really make it her own and add her own art to the book, including to the cover if she wants. So I thought about it would look really nice if this was kind of done more painterly, but she's a painter, so she can do that. So originally the cover, and I think somewhere, I scanned this, and this is something that you can do if you're working with an old cover and you might want to paint on it or do some technique on it and you're not sure what you want to do. I scan it so that I can kind of play around with a copy before I actually start doing anything on the cover. So in this case, this book had this wave, kind of an embossed wave with some silver leafing on it. And then it also had, I don't know if you can see this, it had this embossed little silver sailboat, and there's like fishermen in there and this. So I wanted to kind of do something more interesting to the cover that was more something that was related to Melaine. So the fun thing about when you're working on something for a specific person, if you know them, then you can kind of make a list of their favorite things or colors or hobbies or different things that maybe even tongue-in-cheek personal jokes or anything like that. So I know a few things about her. She's my sister's best friend, but I have met her several times and she's kind of part of the family now. So I know enough about her to be able to, I think, create a journal that then she could take the next steps and work in herself. So I wanted to kind of add some of those touches. So I wanted to put a teacup on the front of her book. And I had tried, I thought maybe I can just turn the sailboat into a teacup. And I kind of started drawing one out and transferring it just onto here. And I really wasn't happy with how parts of the original sailboat were sticking out. And I wasn't sure how to make them all be related. So I decided to just go and get a graphic of a teacup. And in this case, the handle was on the other side, so I had to flip it before I printed it. But I printed it onto fabric. And I will put down in the description, if you're not familiar with printing on fabric, I have a video on how my favorite way is to do it, including making your ink waterproof, because I am working with an inkjet printer. And if you've ever worked with an inkjet printer, you know that that ink is not set normally. And so when you go to glue things or anything, you might get ink coming off. So I will put a link down below and you can see the process of doing that. But I just printed it in a size that would cover my sailboat and then glued it on. Now, one thing I want to point out about this, just because it's not a happy accident, but something that I, as playing around, found that worked that might be helpful to you in the future. So that's why I'm going to bring it up. But I have this embossing and this silver leafing. And I don't know if you can see where it's a little lighter right here above. My sailboat actually kind of stuck just a little tip above my teacup. And I didn't really want to make the teacup any bigger than that. So I was also concerned because of the light color of this. I had already started drawing kind of my teacup on the front cover, and I needed to maybe get rid of all that because I was afraid that when I wet this with glue, it's going to show through, and I don't want to see anything through this. I got really lucky, and I just used a baby wipe to try to get some of that ink off, and it was coming up, and I was just trying to be super careful. Well, I went over that sailboat and I noticed that leafing was just coming right up also. So I was able to kind of erase that whole sailboat off of the cover so that it didn't show through. The other nice thing is because this is, kind of a cardboard chipboard sort of material covered in fabric, just the wetness, the dampness from that baby wipe allowed me to kind of even rub that embossed, I'm calling it embossed, but it's like a depression. The shape of the boat was actually depressed into the cover. And I was able to kind of work that also. You don't even feel that in here anymore. So that was just really a lucky thing that happened. So I went ahead and just put this on here. I think if she wants to paint this, she can make the cover beautiful. Okay, so the next thing I did before I even took the spine off was just to go and start pulling papers and things for the inside. Now, I wanted to, because she's an artist, I wanted to kind of do a hybrid journal. I wanted to stitch it so that it will lay as flat, as it can when she's working on things. So it's going to lay pretty flat. But I wanted to do some signatures too, and I'll tell you why. She had been looking at the videos that I was doing, which was creating journals using lots of different kinds of papers. And I'm going to kind of go to this point and just show you. When you do things like using digitals, so I've used, in this one, I've used my digital kits solely for kits. I didn't print out anyone else's. I've used original bubble papers and things that I've made that I've never put in a journal before. I made all these for mostly just like using in collage or creating art journals. And I have kits in my Etsy shop for these papers, but I had never actually used the originals. But I thought because of the different textures and things, they would be fun to use for collage or whatever she wants to do in here. So I also used some of the actual book pages from this book that I took apart. So I have folios of that. Now, if you're new to all this terminology, I guess I should explain, is a signature is basically a section of the book that's stitched in. There's a whole bunch of them, and you can do any number in a book. There's no rule about it. So each signature is a folio, which is a piece of paper folded in half. So this is one piece of paper folded in half. It created one folio. I folded this piece of paper in half, 2 folios, and then my digital is a 3rd folio. So 3 folios in this one signature, okay? So the reason I'm calling this a hybrid journal is I want to keep my signatures really small so that my pages will stay flat still when they're open. So I just have more signatures in the book that way. A lot of times you'll see when I'm doing a binding where it may be only 5 signatures or 3 signatures, and they have many more pages like this. And then that whole signature is stitched into a spine. And then those are kind of divided, all stitched into the spine, instead of each of these little signatures being sewn to the next one. So I have videos on doing this type of binding, and I will put a link down below so that you can see what I mean if you've never done a binding like that. Okay, so I wanted to do signatures, and the reason that I do like to do that, and you'll see further along, is if I were to have each of these an individual folio and just did one folio on top of the other, it would lay nice and flat, but you get the same, you're getting this piece of paper folded in half, and then you're getting this next piece of paper folded in half, and so on. So when I'm using vintage book page or music page or that kind of thing, I find it more interesting when I'm going through it if I have, this was one folio, this was a different folio. So instead of seeing the other side of this one here, I get more interest as I go through and flip through my book. So that's why I like to do signatures, but I also love this type of binding for exactly the reason that she wanted, so the pages will lay flat when you're working on it. So you can do it that way, and I'm just going to call it a hybrid journal because the other thing you see me adding in is going to be some art paper, which usually I do either an art journal, or we're not going to call this a junk journal because it's not junk, but a type of journal made with other vintage materials and recycled materials and that kind of thing. Okay, so when I did my signatures, I wanted to put some art paper because she's an artist, and so I chose to do watercolor paper. So in my case, I did 3 signatures, a watercolor, 3 signatures, a watercolor, 3 signatures, a watercolor, so on. So I end up with 3 folios of watercolor paper. So I'm going to start back at the beginning and kind of go through so you can kind of see what I've done, and I think then it'll make more sense. So this first folio we've gone through. Okay, so my first is digital. This is bubble technique on vellum, the book page. So you always end up with whatever your center folio is, you do have that one as a spread. And then you're going to see your threads where you stitch it in the center of each signature. Okay, so that's our first signature. And then the next one that I did, I wanted something that coordinated with the back side of this one. And so in this case, I used one of my original papers that I've done a certain technique on. It gives it lots of interesting color and grunge and texture. And that's the other half, because this is one piece of paper that I folded in half. So this is one side of it, and then this is the back side of it, or front side, whichever way. I have videos on these techniques also, so I will put that down below. But I just thought it would be fun to include this as a folio instead of part of a signature, so that she can use this as a background to a spread and just add to it, add her own art to it, and consider this the background. Now she can do the same thing on just this side, it just makes it a smaller piece of art. Okay, so I've done a pocket on this one, but what I want to point out, and you're going to see some pockets in here. Before I did any pockets at all, I put my book together, and I will tell you why. If you watched the last flip through of a journal that I did this similar type of binding, but I had made all kinds of pockets and things in it, and it did not go well. And I do explain that and how I fixed it in that previous flip through. I'll put a link to that down below too, so if you want to watch it, if you missed it, you can see it. What happens is you're laying all of these folios on top of each other and signatures. And if you've started putting pockets in the signatures, it's going to make the bottom of your journal wider, thicker than the top part if you don't have pockets. You don't have pockets up at the top of your journal normally. Now, you might have some that go this way, but that wouldn't affect the thickness from top to bottom because it's here. It would affect it this way, which is not as big a deal when you're stitching your binding together. But when you're doing this type of stitching, you're holding everything together and stitching one to the next one versus stitching a signature to a spine. So it really is important that this is kind of even throughout. So I did fix that journal, and I did show it on what I had done on camera as far as the mistake that I thought I'd made and how I fixed it, just so you can learn if you're new to this. Okay, so I did a signature. This pocket was not there because I wanted it, the same thickness. Then I did a folio for the purpose of creating a piece of art. And then I have another signature, and this one again is this is all the rest of with the exception of that one in the front, all of the digitals are in my Vintage French Collage digital kit in my Etsy shop. I will also put a link down below. These are all just digital collages that I created. Okay, so I start with one of my digitals, and I call these B-sides. You'll notice that there is decoration to that, but it's all faded out. I call those B-sides. They're also a part of the same kit. So that way when I printed these out, I could print something interesting rather than have just a blank white sheet. I also print all of my vintagey kind of digitals onto coffee or tea stain paper. So that way each journal, it'll have a variation. Even if I printed this exact same one on a different piece of coffee stained or tea stained paper, there might be stains or splatters or that kind of thing on it. So it will make each one look a little bit different than the last one, as it would if you printed on white paper and just did a whole bunch of journals on white paper. They're all going to look the same. Okay, so that's a B-side. Then a vintage map, and then I like doing some vintage music. And again, this is in the form of a signature, so rather than seeing the other half of this map right here, I think it's more interesting to go from a page to a map to music. And this one I did already go ahead and make a pocket. I think I did it after, again, I put the book together, but it would not have mattered so much anyway because it's not a pocket that goes this way. It's a pocket that goes this way. So again, this is my bubble technique on vellum, so you can see through it. And when I include pages like this, I do them with the intention that the person who ends up with it, they may or may not leave it like this, because you're thinking, well, can you write on vellum? What could you do with this, to make it be useful in your journal? Well, what you can do is you can tear this, and I wouldn't tear it out at the fold, because if you do that, you're going to even loosen up your stitching more. If you want to use this for something else, maybe collage or a pocket or some embellishment, tear it off, but leave a little bit. Don't tear it off out of the book. Leave a little bit, and then you could actually attach another piece of plain paper that you can write on to the little tab that you left there. So I'm explaining this because Melaine, I don't know how much she's worked with these type of artsy journals before, and I just want her to kind of think outside the box as far as what you could use all these different pages and things for, and maybe how to work with it. So if you have not worked with vellum before, what I use to create pockets as far as glue or tape is I like to use double stick tape. This is just 1/4 inch double stick tape. And I like it because if you use something too gluey, too wet, it might ripple this even more. And it's the same with tracing paper. Any kind of thin, these see-through kind of papers, they will kind of crinkle up and wrinkle up more when they get wet. So I like to use tape to do that. So I trimmed off the piece that was here and made it part of this flap, and then created my pocket on one side, and then I still have my vellum. This is the other half of that music sheet, and then the other half of the map, and the other half of that. Now, when I put my watercolor paper together, two things that I did. One, I tea stained it first, because if you know me, if you've been watching me, I don't like bright white things. And so because I was using kind of vintagey things elsewhere, I wanted to tone down the whiteness, and you can kind of see a little staining there. So I tea stained my watercolor paper first. The other thing I did was I'm folding it with the smooth side in and the textured side out. The reason I did that is because she can do watercolor, on this side, let it dry and all that, have a piece of art here. Same with the other side of it. But then here, she could do a spread, which could be adding collage and all kinds of techniques and paint and whatever, more mixed media type thing. Personally, I like to do that on the flat side, not on the textured side. So that's why I folded mine kind of backwards, okay? The other thing that I did with the watercolor, those three pieces that I have, is I wrapped them in a doily. And let me see. So I started out with a doily that I've coffee stained, and this is the big, kind of placemat size. And I cut them in half this way, and then that way I have two then, and then I folded them. So now they were kind of like a folio, okay? So when I started this, when I put this journal together, I had this wrapped in, so it was one side here and the other side was here. And so it was kind of like a two folio signature, if you want to look at it that way, okay? So that's how I put that together. And the reason I did that is it gave me something not bright white and a little textural interest in my binding, seeing through all of my folios. And then it allowed me something to create some pockets with. And also when I arranged these, I have a signature on one side and a signature on the other side, which gave me two different interesting pieces of paper that flank this piece of artwork. So I just liked that kind of interest in as you're flipping through. So for the pockets, since I've already made them and I didn't do them on camera, I took that doily and I wanted to reinforce it because, it's just a paper doily, and you have all of this, see-through stuff that makes it kind of more flimsy. So I took some, this is just tracing paper. Strathmore is the brand I use, just plain tracing paper that I've tea stained. And so it changes the color. It's not, a huge amount of color in there, but it's not as light as the original. Let me grab the pad and I can show you. I just like to tea stain everything just to knock out the white. So this is just tracing paper. It's smooth, and it's transparent parchment is what it is. So you can see how bright white this is. And if I get a few pieces of this tea stained same paper, you can see it's a subtle color difference. So I like to tea stain batches of this, and that way it gives it kind of a crinkly sound after it's dried and you've ironed it, and you can still see through it. So I just wanted to kind of strengthen this doily. So I just basically kind of glued it to the, I did this after it was in the book because I wasn't sure. When I first put them in, I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And then after they were there, I decided to turn them into pockets. So when I put them in, there's a right side and a wrong side to this. It's smoother, and then this is kind of rough. I actually put them in with the smooth side out. And so then the rough side is here, which doesn't matter once you turn it into a pocket. I think it kind of evens it all out when you do the technique that I did. But I just used, protect your pages with a piece of paper. And then I just use a Yoo-Hoo glue stick. You can use any kind that you like, but this is the brand I use. And I just put it over the back side of the doily. That way, if I went through the holes, I had the paper protecting it. And then I just closed it over and attached it to my tracing paper. And I did it where, you can't really see now because I've glued it down, but I just kind of did it straight, even though this edge is, you know, kind of cut, not a straight edge. You can't really tell when it's all said and done because it's kind of a sheer thing by the time you've glued it on there. It just kind of disappears. And then you can still see all the doily details through that. So I just reinforced it with a strip of the tracing paper and then glued this down. Now to glue this down, I did use my art glitter glue because that holds better than trying to use double stick tape for a pocket. So I created a pocket just by folding it. And so then the thickness of the doily, you know, it's double thick now with that tracing paper in between. So it makes it a sturdy enough little pocket. So then I have my art piece here. And then same thing, I had the same size doily. And for this one, I just put the tracing paper, again, what was up is this back side of the doily. So I just covered the whole thing with a piece of tracing paper, again, using the glue stick. Now, one thing about using glue stick on the back of doily I should mention is when you put it on, it doesn't go everywhere. It kind of skips and makes a mess. So you do have to use your finger and kind of smoosh it everywhere. But it does get it damp enough, and to me, it's the better thing to use to attach the doily to the tracing paper than to use a more wet glue, again, because this is going to just wrinkle up a lot if you use something too wet. So I just use the glue stick, put it together, and then I actually take it over and iron it. If you know me, I like to iron my paper. It just gets it completely dried out and stiffens it up a little bit. So I did that and then folded, you know, just fold the corner over. And because I had the doily was where the back side was showing and the front side was here, when I folded that over for this corner, now this is the top side of the doily. And so it's kind of my detailed, you know, decorative corner. And then you can still add embellishment. I think I may still add some kind of embellishment here, but it just made a nice sturdy, again, corner pocket. So I did that. And then we get to chapter 2 of the book. So if this is the front of the next signature, chapter 2. And then this is just a digital I printed from some Italian ephemera. And I also have a kit for Italian ephemera in my Etsy shop. I don't know if this particular page is from there, but probably. So there's that signature. The back side of this one I did not print because the paper that I had used, the coffee stained paper, had a nice salt technique I did on it. So it was interesting enough to me. And then the next page is, I haven't done a video about with this technique, but maybe at some point I will. It's just tea stain with stencils. So I had a piece of that and I just like the flower pattern. Again, one of my digitals with a B-side. This is just a vintage book page in Italian. And then this is just a piece of tea stained paper. Again, she can do some kind of spread here, but it is thinner. And then the back sides of those, and another digital kit. This again is another signature here. So one of my digitals with a B side, another piece of the bubble technique on vellum. And when I arrange mine, I just kind of try to give them some kind of cohesive flow to, whether it's color or pattern or just something that looks pleasing together. This is just a piece of tea stain lined paper that's lined one side and graph on the other. Some vintage dictionary, the other side of that, the other side of my vellum piece. And even if you leave this in and don't journal on it or do anything, I don't know, there's creative things you can still do. You know, cutting part of it out and having the bottom be a pocket, or I just even like the way you see one through to the other. Just just for fun and when you're flipping through. Then I get to another piece of watercolor paper. And in this case, I had my doily again. You can kind of see it through there. I took a piece of the tracing paper again, but I folded it in half, trimmed it to the height of my doily, and then I just glued one side of the doily to one side of the tracing paper, and then used some double stick tape on 3 sides to create a pocket. And then I did notch one side of it just so you know it is a little sleeve. That way I can add little bits of things, you know. I'm going to send with her just some different scraps of papers and handmade papers maybe, and some gel print pieces to collage with and that sort of thing. So then we have the art piece again, and then just another little sleeve sort of pocket with that doily. And again, you can still, you know, journal on this, embellish it, whatever you want to do. And then another page of that digital kit. That digital kit, I think, is nine collages and 9 B-sides. So you have plenty of options. So this one does have a B-side. And then this is another one of my handmade papers, hand painted, if you want to call it that technique, just making the grungy papers. And the other side, I just liked, her favorite color is orange, so I needed something that had some kind of orange in it. And then this has kind of beachy sort of colors. And then another map. And chapter 3 of the, I guess the other half's here. Chapter 3 of the Hurricane book. And then this is just some vintage French vocabulary book. And the other half of that, and the map. And I tried, when I do the map, I tried to do areas that either she's traveled to or lived in, that kind of thing. So that was another signature. And then this, I'm getting close to the end. Then this signature starts with a vintage map and some coffee stained paper, page where I lived and what I lived for, out of a Walden, and then some vintage ledger, the other half of that, and then another digital. And this had a B-side. And this digital I actually did, I don't know if you'll be able to tell, it kind of sparkles, and I don't think you'll see that on camera at all. But this was another paper, another technique that I had done where kind of, it might have been in the same video as some of these, but it has kind of, I think I used mica sprays in the tea stain or liquid that I used. And I went ahead and copied my digital on it because it was nice and flat, but it has this really pretty, you could see these wrinkles. They're kind of a bronzy, shimmery color. So it was just kind of a pretty thing. You don't always have to print on just plain papers or tea stain papers. You can print on all kinds of things. I think I actually have a video somewhere of different ideas for, it's actually a beginner digital for people who are beginners at purchasing digitals on Etsy and then printing them. It gives you some tips about that. So you can print on all kinds of things. And then, so this one is another from the digital kit, but it was printed onto bubble paper. So, you know, you kind of try to just think outside the box a little bit. So another vintage map, another vintage book. This is actually Ray's Practical Arithmetic, and my husband's Ray, so I hope she sees that. I put a little nod to him in here. And then I have one planned for Mike. If you're watching this, I do have some paper gel printing techniques I'm going to do that will be a nod to Mike, her husband. And then the other half of that, the other part of the digital. And again, I added the doily pocket because here we have another watercolor paper again. So this is why I'm calling it a hybrid thing. There's lots of places for her to do journaling, adding her collections of things, and also creating little pieces of art. So, and this is the back side of that. This is another one of my technique papers, but a real subtle one, if you can see it. I think they're prettier in real life. It's kind of hard to translate it onto the camera, I think, sometimes. And then another little dictionary page. This is the back side again. This is a digital printed on one of my paper technique pages. Again, it was one that was subtle enough, and the colors already kind of went with the colors that I had stained this. So, you wouldn't necessarily know until you saw the back side of it. And then there, the digital, and then I think we're getting to the end. Again, this is another one of my papers. And it's wild to look at them, that this is the same piece of paper, how the different colors are, and it's because of the technique. So you'll have to, I'll find that video and be sure and put it down below. And then this was a map that I did. This is the one thing that I did already fold before I sewed it in, but having just one fold up like that was not going to make a huge difference in the thickness. So I went ahead and just did this one, so that I could make this into a pocket and a pocket here. So I haven't done that yet. And then this is just another piece of mixed media paper in this one. Again, so she can do some other type of artwork. And then the back side's that. I'm really curious to see how she uses these, if they're just, the base of another piece of art. What will she see in it and add to it, And then this is a piece. I'm not sure what this is on. This might be on a very thin piece of rice paper, but it was my bubble technique. You can sort of see through it a little bit, not as much as tracing paper, and it's much flatter after you iron it than tracing paper. So I'm thinking it might be rice paper, but that's just really pretty too with the bubbles. And then chapter 4, the last chapter that I used from the book. Again, this is another one of my papers with the bubble, and I just like the colors. This is just very ocean colors and sand. And the other half of that. So it's just kind of a nice variety of my original digitals, some vintage things, and lots of artsy papers so that she can, tear little bits off. You could, like I said, leave it in the seam, in the binding. Don't disturb that. But you could tear pieces off and use them to collage on another page. So I'm hoping that she will share some of her journaling in. She actually has a group that I think she and a friend started that I'm a part of on Facebook called Sharing Our Art. So I'm hoping she'll share some of that on here. Now, one thing that I had to do, and I'll explain what this is. In fact, the next video that's coming after this one, I will actually show you how I did this paper. But I ended up in a dilemma because I had put all my signatures together, which were these. And I really wanted this to be my front page. But I didn't want to Coptic stitch bind this in with the holes because this would be too loose. So I wanted to bind this in the way where this first folio is actually stitched in with all of these, but you use that front page and glue it to your cover. And then you can see those little lace tabs that I use to cover my stitching. Those also get glued down. And it just makes your cover more sturdy on your book block. And I like that. So my dilemma was, I wanted this to be my first page. So, and I had already laid everything else out. So I could have just used another page on top of this and glued that down. But then I wouldn't have had the back side of this as my next here. And I really liked how these look together. So I didn't want to put another piece here. So my idea then was create a folio separate from this, so it'd be folio, first signature. And so that together, then I could glue the other half of that first folio to my cover. So I wanted this something see-through because I liked how colorful this was, and this is like the title page. So I thought I'm going to use the tracing paper, but it's not sturdy enough. Tracing paper, vellum, anything see-through like that is too fragile to actually expect me to have this stay together and hold this cover on. The tabs help, but I also needed this to be kind of sturdy. I like, if you've watched me, to do that with fabric because that's always sturdy. It's not going to tear like paper does. So my idea was take the tracing paper, keep it see-through by using something really thin fabric-wise to line this. So I used cheesecloth. So if you see that, you can see it gave me a really cool looking wavy, we're going to call it net, like fishing net pattern, to kind of go with my theme of hurricane and the ocean and all that. So that was my solution. I do show you how I made this in the next video that's coming up. So check that out. And then I decided I liked this so much I ended up making more of it just to use for other things. So that is what I actually used for this pocket. So in the next video, I did not put the pocket on, but you'll see me actually make this piece of paper. And then I did leave the edge on, and you'll understand when you see the video how that all works out, because obviously on here I trimmed them. But you can leave that hanging on there. And then on this case, I just stitched on a little piece of lace. And I purposely did not, and I have it where you can see the fabric side is, you can feel that it's very tactile. And I even just kind of left this because if you watch me, I like things a little grungy, you know. And I left this loose so that if she wants to cut off pieces or shorten it and use this, you know, some flowers, if she doesn't mind tearing things up and being grungy, I just ripped this lace. So it's, you know, it has a tatty edge already. But she could take a little piece, cut a little piece off and embellish something else with it. So that's why I went ahead and left it loose. So my intention for this journal is to fill it full of removable things. So I might put like a little grouping of papers or something that can be taken off and removed, or, you know, put doilies in the pocket, things that she could use then to create art on another page. So that's kind of my intention with this. I'm to the point now where I just need to fill the pockets, whether it's with a journal card or something, just to kind of give her little prompts and little goodies to use throughout the journal. Other than that, putting a closure of some kind, because this is going to get really thick when she starts adding things. So I just need to do that, and then we'll be finished with it. So I'm going to make a few more things to put inside. You're going to watch the next video, which has some fun little textural, tactile things that I've already started making, and that are kind of in that net kind of theme. And so check that out, and I'm going to get back to work. So have a great rest of your day. Now go make something. Bye.